The cruelest prison is not built with stone, but with the face a man can no longer bear to see. Duke Nathaniel Blackthorne stood alone in the west study of Ravenmore Hall, surrounded by velvet curtains, dying candlelight, and mirrors covered in black cloth. There were 7 mirrors in that room, though no guest would have known it. 1 above the fireplace, 2 between the bookcases, 1 beside the locked cabinet where old invitations lay unanswered, 3 along the far wall, placed there by his mother years ago to catch the afternoon sun and multiply it until the chamber looked almost golden. Now each mirror wore mourning like a widow, draped from top to floor, pinned tightly so no silver edge could betray him. Nathaniel had ordered every looking-glass in Ravenmore covered within a week of his return from the war. At first, the servants thought grief had made him dramatic. Then they saw what happened when a tray reflected his face, when a dark window caught his outline, when polished silver returned even a broken suggestion of the man he had become. After that, no one questioned the cloth. The house learned obedience. It learned darkness. It learned to move around its master as one moves around a sealed room. Rain struck the tall windows with quiet persistence, and beyond the glass, the grounds of Ravenmore vanished into a gray New England night. Nathaniel stood near the hearth, one hand resting on the mantel, the other raised halfway to his cheek before he forced it down again. He would not touch the scar. Touching it proved it existed. Avoiding it did not make it disappear, but grief is rarely logical. On the black window before him, the candle behind his shoulder created a dim reflection. Not enough to show detail. Enough to suggest a pale face divided by shadow. Enough to show the altered line where society believed his life had ended. He turned away so sharply that the brandy glass on the table rattled. "Curtains," he said, though no one was in the room to obey. His voice sounded harsh in the emptiness. Once, people had praised that voice. They had praised everything then. His manners, his fortune, his laugh, his face. Especially his face. There had been a time when Nathaniel Blackthorne could enter a Boston ballroom and feel every conversation adjust to his arrival. Mothers saw title and legacy. Daughters saw romance. Men saw influence wrapped in charm. He had believed none of it mattered, which was easy to believe when admiration came as steadily as breath. Then the war took the old certainty from him. It did not take his title. It did not take his estates. It left him with every visible sign of power and removed the one thing society had loved without admitting it loved: beauty. Afterward, letters came first. Warm, elegant letters full of concern. Then fewer invitations. Then visits arranged with careful lighting and faces that tried not to react. Lady Vivian Cross had looked at him for 3 seconds before turning her gaze toward the carpet. 3 seconds were enough. By the following week, Ravenmore heard the rumor that the Duke had become a ruined man. Nathaniel smiled when Mrs. Holloway reported it, because pride sometimes survives by pretending not to bleed. Then he dismissed half the staff, closed the ballroom, covered the mirrors, and gave the world exactly what it had expected from him: absence. A knock came at the study door. Nathaniel stiffened. "What is it?" Mrs. Holloway entered with her black dress severe, her keys silent tonight at her waist. She had served Ravenmore long enough to fear very little, but even she kept her eyes trained just below his shoulder. "The new servant girl has arrived, Your Grace. Clara Bennett. She is to assist with the lower rooms and evening trays." "Another one?" "The last girl refused the west corridor after dusk." "Sensible of her." Mrs. Holloway did not respond. Nathaniel moved toward the desk, where the candlelight could not catch the window behind him. "Tell this one the rules." "I already have, Your Grace." "Then add another." "She is not to enter this room unless summoned." The housekeeper hesitated. "Your tea, sir." "You dismissed Thomas from evening service." Nathaniel had forgotten. Or perhaps he had wanted to forget how many ordinary tasks had become negotiations with shame. "Then leave it outside the door." "As you wish." Mrs. Holloway turned to go, but the door opened wider before she reached it. A young woman stood in the hallway with a silver tray balanced carefully in both hands. She wore a plain dark dress, a white apron, and rain still glimmered faintly along the edge of her hair where the servant's entrance had not sheltered her completely. Clara Bennett lowered her eyes at once, as instructed. Yet Nathaniel saw, in the brief instant before she did, that her face had not changed. No flinch, no startled pity, no quick, greedy glance toward the side of him everyone pretended not to study. Only a quiet awareness, then courtesy. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she said. "I was told the tray should come before the tea cooled." Her voice was low, steady, and without ornament. Nathaniel should have sent her away. Instead, Rain tapped the glass. The covered mirrors watched from behind their black veils, and for the first time in years, a stranger stood in his study without making him feel like a wound on display. Clara Bennet did not mistake the Duke's silence for permission, but neither did she mistake it for dismissal. She stepped only far enough into the West study to set the tea tray on the small table beside the hearth, careful not to let the silver pot catch the candlelight too brightly. Mrs. Holloway had warned her before supper with the grave precision of someone reciting rules written in another person's pain. Do not stare. Do not startle. Do not mention the mirrors. Do not speak of the war. If His Grace turns away, you lower your eyes. If he tells you to leave, you leave before the second breath. Clara had listened, folded each rule away, and understood the truth beneath them. Ravenmore Hall did not fear its master. It feared reminding him that he had been seen. Duke Nathaniel Blackthorne stood near the desk, half in shadow, his dark coat severe against the dim firelight. The left side of his face remained turned slightly from her, though she had not tried to look at it. That was the strange thing, Nathaniel thought. Most people either stared too long or avoided him so obviously that their mercy became another kind of mirror. This servant girl did neither. She noticed the tray, the table, the curtains, the safest path for her steps. She looked at him only when courtesy required it, and when she did, her gaze did not rush away as if burned. "Mrs. Holloway said lemon should be served with your tea," Clara said. "If that is incorrect, I can bring milk instead." "Tea is tea," Nathaniel replied. "Hardly, Your Grace." The answer came before she seemed to remember that servants were not invited to disagree. Mrs. Holloway made a small sound of warning near the door. Clara lowered her eyes. "Forgive me. My last mistress believed weak tea was a moral failing." Against his will, Nathaniel looked at her more fully. Was she right? No, Your Grace. She had many moral failings of her own and still brewed it strong. Mrs. Holloway's face tightened in horror, but the study did not erupt. The Duke did not shout. He did not dismiss her. For one brief second, something almost alive crossed his expression, too faint to be called amusement and too unfamiliar to remain. Then rain shifted against the window, and the candle flame leapt in the draught. Clara saw the reflection before he did, a pale shape in the glass behind him, broken by darkness and flame. Nathaniel's body went rigid. His hand struck the edge of the desk, not violently, only suddenly, and the teaspoon on the tray trembled against porcelain. "Leave," he said. The word came low, controlled, but sharpened by panic he would have rather swallowed than revealed. Mrs. Holloway reached for Clara's sleeve. Clara did not move toward the Duke. She did not speak his name. She simply crossed to the window and drew the heavy velvet curtain closed, one panel, then the other, until the glass no longer held him. The room softened at once. Fire, wood, books, black-draped mirrors. No reflection, no watching surface. "There," Clara said quietly, her hand still on the curtain cord. "The glass cannot trouble you now." Mrs. Holloway inhaled as if Clara had broken a sacred law. Nathaniel stared at the closed curtain. Anger would have been easier. Anger would have restored rank, order, distance. But what he felt was far more dangerous. Relief. The servant girl had not covered the window because she found him unbearable. She had covered it because he did. That distinction entered the room like a candle carried carefully through darkness. "You presume a great deal," he said. Clara turned from the curtain and lowered her hands. "Only that reflections are poor company when a man wishes to drink tea. And you know many such men? I know many people who dislike being forced to face what hurts before they are ready." Her voice remained respectful, but it did not shrink. Nathaniel studied her, searching for pity, curiosity, fear, any familiar insult disguised as softness. He found none. Her dress was plain. Her hands were reddened from work. A small darn marked one cuff. She stood in his study not as a heroine from foolish novels, not as a bold girl enchanted by darkness, but as someone who had carried trays through enough sorrow to recognize that pain did not always want witnesses. "You saw my face," he said. It was not a question. Clara looked at the tea tray. "I saw that the tea was cooling." "That is not what I asked." No, your grace. She lifted her eyes then, steady but gentle. I saw a man turn from a window. Nothing more that needed my judgment. The answer silenced even Mrs. Holloway. Nathaniel felt the old bitterness rise, ready with its practiced cruelty. A man. Was that what she thought kindness required? Pretending the world had not changed him? You are either very foolish, he said, or very carefully trained. I am poor, your grace. Poverty trains a person to notice what others try to hide. Mrs. Holloway stepped forward. Miss Bennet, that is quite enough. No, Nathaniel said. The housekeeper stopped. Clara did as well. Rain continued beyond the curtain, unheard but present, like the world he had dismissed still waiting outside Ravensmoor's walls. He looked at the servant girl again, and hated that her composure unsettled him more than disgust would have. Disgust he knew how to answer. Pity he knew how to punish. This calm, practical mercy left him without armor. Pour the tea, he said at last. Clara crossed back to the tray and did so, careful, silent, no smile of victory on her face. When she placed the cup on the desk, he noticed she had turned the polished spoon downward, dull side up, so it reflected nothing. A small thing, almost nothing. Yet Nathaniel saw it. And because he saw it, he understood that she had seen him far more clearly than anyone who had stared. The days that followed taught Ravensmoor Hall to listen for small things. A curtain drawn before twilight. A spoon turned dull side upward. A tray placed where no polished edge could return an unwanted face. Clara Bennet did not announce these changes, and because she did not announce them, Duke Nathaniel Blackthorne noticed each one more sharply. His study remained dark, but not quite as airless. The west window stayed covered after sunset, yet each morning Clara opened the curtain enough to let gray light fall across the books and not the glass. She dusted the black cloth over the mirrors without lifting a corner. She trimmed the candle wicks so they burned steady instead of flaring against reflective surfaces. She replaced the silver tea service with plain porcelain, explaining to Mrs. Holloway that porcelain kept heat better, which was not entirely untrue. Nathaniel said nothing. Silence had been his fortress for years, and he would not abandon it because one servant girl had learned how to move through it without knocking stones loose. Yet the silence changed when she entered. It no longer tightened. One afternoon, rain gave way to a cold, clear wind, and Clara brought a fresh tray to the study with a small bundle of dried lavender laid beside the cup. Nathaniel looked at it as though it had trespassed. What is that? Lavender, your grace. I can see that. Then I have answered correctly. His eyes lifted. Clara's face remained composed, though a trace of warmth rested at the edge of her mouth. He should have found the reply impertinent. Instead, he found himself less alone than he had been a moment earlier. Why is it here? He asked. The room smells of smoke and old paper. Lavender is quieter than roses. Flowers are rarely quiet. Roses are not. They expect to be admired. Lavender does useful work and does not complain. Nathaniel looked from the dried stems to the covered mirrors, then toward the desk where unanswered invitations lay in a locked drawer. You have opinions about flowers. Only when they resemble people. A faint sound left him before he could stop it. Not laughter. Not fully. But enough that Clara heard and lowered her eyes to spare him the embarrassment of being witnessed in a moment of life. That mercy touched him more than the sound itself. Later, when she returned to collect the tray, she found him standing before the largest covered mirror, his hand gripping the edge of the black cloth without pulling it away. The fire behind him had burned low. Shadows lay across his shoulders. For the first time, Clara saw not a forbidding duke, nor a ruined legend, but a man at war with a piece of fabric because the cloth guarded him from a truth he both hated and needed. She stopped at the door. Shall I come back, your grace? His hand remained on the cloth. Do you think me a coward? The question entered the room without warning. Clara knew servants were not meant to answer such things. But he had not asked as a duke. He had asked as a man standing before the place where courage had failed him too many times to count. No, she said. Cowards do not usually ask honest questions. He gave a bitter breath. You are generous. Not always. Then be ungenerous. He turned slightly, the scarred side of his face still angled away from the fire. What do you see when you look at me? The air seemed to thin. Beyond the windows, the first stars had begun to show over Ravensmoor's dark lawns. Clara set the tray down carefully. She did not move closer. I see a man who believes every eye is a verdict. Nathaniel's fingers tightened on the cloth. And yours? Mine are not a court. He looked at her then, fully enough that most people would have flinched from the trust and challenge of it. Clara did not pretend the scar was invisible. To pretend would have been another lie. Her gaze rested on his face with calm attention, then returned to his eyes, not as an escape, but as a choice. I have known men with smooth faces who left deeper wounds than any scar, she said softly. And I have known wounded men who were kinder because pain taught them what pride never could. For a long moment, Nathaniel did not speak. The covered mirror stood between what he feared and what she had offered. Not praise, not pity. A way to exist without being reduced to the worst thing that had happened to him. He released the cloth. It fell back against the glass with a soft sigh. You speak too freely for a servant. Perhaps, Your Grace. You should be afraid of dismissal. Clara lifted the tray. I have been poor long enough to fear many things. Losing honest words is one of them. She left before he could answer. Nathaniel remained beside the covered mirror, the scent of lavender faint in the smoke-dark room, wondering why her words had not healed him and yet had made the wound feel less like a prison. The next morning, Ravenmore Hall received an unwelcome card. Mrs. Holloway carried it into the West study on a silver tray covered with a linen square so the polished surface would not catch the Duke's reflection. Nathaniel stood at the window in daylight, not looking at the glass, but no longer standing entirely away from it either. Clara had opened the curtains that morning before the sun grew too bright, and he had not ordered them closed. It was a small victory no one mentioned. Mrs. Holloway stopped near the desk. Lady Vivian Cross has arrived, Your Grace. She says her carriage will suffer damage on the South Road and asks for shelter until repairs are made. Nathaniel's face did not change, but the room altered around his stillness. Clara, who was arranging fresh paper near the bookcase, felt it at once. Some names do not enter a house. They reopen it. Send her to the morning room, Nathaniel said. With tea. Mrs. Holloway hesitated. Your Grace, you need not receive her personally. I know what I need not do. His voice was calm, which made it worse. Clara kept her eyes on the stack of paper. She knew little of Lady Vivian beyond the whispers below stairs. A celebrated widow, once admired by Nathaniel before the war, elegant enough to be forgiven for cruelty if she wrapped it in concern. When Mrs. Holloway left, Nathaniel turned toward the covered mirror above the mantel. His hand did not rise to his face, but Clara saw the desire for the old gesture pass through him. You may go, he said. Yes, Your Grace. She moved toward the door, then paused. The rules of the house told her to leave. The rules of sorrow told her something else. Shall I bring the porcelain service to the morning room? He looked at her. Why? It reflects less. For a long moment, his expression remained unreadable. Then the faintest shadow of understanding crossed his eyes. Porcelain, then. Lady Vivian Cross entered the morning room as if Ravenmore had been waiting for her beauty to forgive its darkness. She wore traveling silk the color of pale wine, gloves without a wrinkle, and a hat trimmed with feathers that had clearly suffered no road hardship. Two companions followed her, both smiling with the careful sympathy of women hoping to witness something worth repeating. Nathaniel arrived last. The room fell silent, though no one admitted why. Vivian's gaze moved over him with practiced delicacy, pausing just long enough to wound while pretending not to. Nathaniel, she said softly. How long it has been. Lady Vivian. Still so formal. But perhaps Ravenmore has made everyone formal. How dark you keep it. Her eyes moved toward the covered mirror on the wall. How very sad. Clara stood near the tea table, hands folded, face lowered. She felt rather than saw Nathaniel's restraint. The weather has made the house dim, he said. Vivian smiled. Weather is a convenient servant. It can be blamed for almost anything. One of her companions gave a small laugh, then smothered it in a cough. Clara poured tea, using the plain porcelain cups, turning each handle outward. Her movements were quiet, but Nathaniel noticed them. She placed his cup where no polished spoon lay beside it. Vivian noticed too. How thoughtful your staff has become, she said. One hears Ravenmore has changed greatly. Houses change with their masters, Nathaniel replied. Or because of them. Vivian leaned back, her smile curving. You used to adore bright rooms. Do you remember the winter ball at Ashford House? Every mirror in the ballroom caught your face. Half the women there forgot their partners. Nathaniel's fingers stilled around the cup. Clara felt the room sharpen. Memory is not always accurate, he said. No, Vivian murmured. Sometimes it is kinder than truth. Clara lowered her gaze further, not in submission, but to keep her anger from showing. Vivian had not come for shelter. She had come to confirm a story. The ruined Duke. The dark manor. The covered mirrors. A wound dressed as afternoon amusement. Then Vivian rose and drifted toward the wall. Surely you do not keep every mirror hidden. That would be too theatrical, even for grief. Mrs. Holloway, stationed by the door, stepped forward. My lady, perhaps another cup of tea. Vivian ignored her. Her gloved hand reached for the edge of the black cloth covering the mirror. Nathaniel stood. Do not. The word was quiet, but every person in the room heard the warning beneath it. Vivian turned, all innocence. My dear Duke, it is only a mirror. Then it can remain only covered. But shadows grow so heavy when left undisturbed. She pulled the cloth down. The mirror flashed with sudden light. For one instant, the room doubled. Vivian's pale gown, the watching companions, the tea table, the servant girl near the window, and Nathaniel standing rigid before the returned image of himself. No one moved. Nathaniel saw the scar first because he always did. Then he saw their faces watching him see it. The old prison closed around his breath. But before darkness could claim him, Clara stepped forward and stood beside him in the mirror's frame. She did not reach for the cloth. She did not hide the glass. She simply stood there, plain dress, steady eyes, reflected beside him as if the sight of him required no apology. Vivian's smile faltered. Nathaniel looked at the mirror again. This time, he saw not only what had been taken. He saw a servant girl standing calmly at his side, teaching the room that he was not meant to face cruelty alone. Lady Vivian Cross did not understand at first that her cruelty had failed. She stood with one gloved hand still resting on the fallen black cloth, her reflection bright and perfect in the uncovered mirror, waiting for Duke Nathaniel Blackthorne to retreat, rage, or turn away. The room waited with her. Mrs. Holloway's face had gone pale with fury she had no rank to express. Vivian's companions hovered near the sofa, hungry and frightened in equal measure. Clara Bennet remained beside the Duke, her hands folded before her apron, her posture respectful, her gaze steady in the glass. She did not look triumphant. She did not look protective in any grand, theatrical way. She only looked as though his presence beside her was ordinary, as though a scarred face in a mirror did not deserve the collapse of an entire room. That was what unsettled Vivian. Not defiance, not insolence. Calm. Nathaniel saw it too. He saw himself, yes, and the scar that divided every memory of who he had been from every morning he had endured since. But beyond that old, cruel line, he saw Clara's reflection standing at his shoulder without flinching. He saw Mrs. Holloway trembling with loyalty. He saw Vivian watching for pain like a collector examining porcelain for cracks. And for the first time in years, the shame did not arrive alone. It arrived with witnesses he could choose to answer. You were asked not to touch the mirror, Nathaniel said. His voice was low, but the old weakness Vivian had hoped for was not in it. Her smile returned, thinner now. I only thought a little light might improve the room. Light does not improve what is brought here with dark intentions. One of Vivian's companions looked down at her teacup. Vivian's eyes sharpened. How dramatic you have become. Nathaniel turned from the mirror to face her fully. The movement was quiet, but it changed everything. He did not angle his scar away. He did not hide in profile. He stood as he was, and the room had no choice but to adjust. No, he said. I became private. People like you mistook that for permission to make me an exhibit. Clara lowered her eyes, not because she was ashamed, but because the moment belonged to him. Vivian laughed softly. An exhibit? My dear Nathaniel, you give yourself too much importance. Society was concerned for you. Society was curious. Can you blame it? The word slipped out more sharply than she intended. There it was, naked at last beneath silk and manners. The room heard it. Nathaniel heard it. Clara heard it, and felt something cold settle inside her. Not fear, but the old knowledge of how polished people could make cruelty sound like conversation until they were forced to speak plainly. Nathaniel looked at Vivian for a long moment. No, he said at last. I cannot blame curiosity. I can blame cowardice dressed as concern. Vivian's face flushed. You forget yourself. For years, he replied. I am trying to remember. The silence that followed was deeper than insult. It was judgment reversed. Vivian turned toward Clara, seeking an easier target. And your servant teaches you remembrance now. Mrs. Holloway stepped forward at once. Lady Vivian. But Clara had already lifted her head. She did not address Vivian with anger. Anger would have fed the woman. She spoke with the same quiet steadiness with which she poured tea. No, my lady. His Grace remembered himself before any of us entered the room. Some people only prefer him not to know it. Vivian's fan snapped open, though her hand trembled. How extraordinary. Ravenmore now lets maids lecture guests. Nathaniel's gaze did not leave Vivian. Ravenmore lets honest people speak. That ended her smile. Within 20 minutes, Lady Vivian's carriage had somehow become repaired enough for departure. Her companions gathered their gloves and shawls in embarrassed haste. Their earlier appetite for spectacle turned sour. Nathaniel did not escort them to the door. Mrs. Holloway did, with such icy correctness that no one could accuse her of rudeness, though every step expressed it. When the morning room emptied, the uncovered mirror remained. The black cloth lay across the rug like a shed skin. Clara moved toward it. Shall I cover it again, Your Grace? Nathaniel looked at the mirror. His reflection waited, altered and familiar, terrible only because he had given it the authority of a sentence. He felt the old urge to say yes, to restore darkness, to let the room become safe by becoming smaller. Instead, his eyes moved to Clara's reflection. No, he said. Leave it. She stilled. As you wish. Miss Bennet. She turned. For a moment, the distance between Duke and servant returned in full. The grand room, the polished floor, the title resting on him like armor, the apron marking her place as clearly as any law. Yet something else stood there too, quiet and undeniable. Gratitude, yes. Respect, more dangerously. Why did you stand beside me, he asked. Clara's hands folded around the empty tea tray. Because she wanted you to stand alone. His throat tightened before he could command it not to. And you thought your presence would change that. It did. Not pride. Not softness. Simple truth. Nathaniel looked back at the mirror. For years, he had believed courage meant looking and feeling nothing. Now he wondered if courage meant looking while someone honorable remained near enough to remind him he was more than what the glass returned. You may go, he said, because his voice could not safely hold more. Clara curtsied and left the room with the tray. At the door, she paused only long enough to glance once at the uncovered mirror, where the Duke stood in daylight for the first time in years. He did not look healed. He looked shaken, pale, and wounded still. But he had not turned away. And in Ravenmore Hall, where every mirror had worn mourning, one piece of glass had been allowed to live uncovered. The uncovered mirror changed Ravenmore Hall more quietly than any proclamation could have. At first, only the servants noticed. Mrs. Holloway passed the morning room twice before noon and did not order the black cloth restored. A footman carrying coal glanced toward the glass, saw the room reflected in full daylight, and nearly stumbled from surprise. Clara Bennet entered after breakfast with fresh water for the flowers and found Duke Nathaniel Blackthorne standing several feet from the mirror, not close enough to study himself, not far enough to escape it. The lavender she had placed in his study days before now sat in a small vase on the mantel. Its scent had faded, but it remained. Good morning, Your Grace, she said. He did not turn at once. Is it? Clara looked toward the windows, where sunlight touched the wet lawn beyond the terrace. It is trying to be. That answer drew the faintest breath from him, not amusement exactly, but something less guarded than silence. He faced her then. The scar was visible in the pale morning light, no longer hidden by shadow or angle. Clara saw it because it existed. Then she saw his eyes because he existed more. Nathaniel seemed to understand the difference, though it unsettled him. Lady Vivian will spread whatever version pleases her, he said. Clara set the water pitcher on the side table. Most people do. You are not concerned? About Lady Vivian? About being named in her story. Clara's hands stilled. She knew what he meant. A servant girl standing beside a duke in a mirror could become something ugly in a cruel mouth before the sun set. People who enjoy harming others rarely require truth to begin, she said. Then I have placed you at risk. No, Your Grace. She did. You merely allowed me to remain where I chose to stand. The words struck him with a force he did not show. Choice had become a strange and precious thing in Ravenmore. He had chosen darkness and called it protection. Clara had chosen presence and called it simple decency. Why, he asked. You answered that yesterday. I am asking again. Clara looked at the covered mirrors along the walls, then at the uncovered one. Because I know what it is to have people decide the shape of you without asking what you survived. Nathaniel's expression changed. Who did that to you? She lowered her eyes, not in submission this time, but in memory. No one important enough to name in your house. That does not answer me. It is the only answer I wish to give today. A year earlier, he might have commanded the rest from her. A month earlier, he might have dismissed her for withholding it. Now he recognized the boundary for what it was, not disrespect, but self-preservation. He inclined his head. Then today is enough. Clara looked up, and for a moment gratitude passed between them without either naming it. After she left, Nathaniel returned to the west study. The covered mirrors waited there like judges who had lost some of their authority. He stood before the largest one above the mantel, the first mirror he had ordered veiled after the war. His hand rose to the black cloth. It took him several minutes to close his fingers around the edge. Memory did not vanish because one cruel woman had been answered. Shame did not dissolve because one servant girl had refused to flinch. Yet something had shifted. The mirror no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a locked letter from the man he had abandoned. He pulled the cloth down. Dust lifted into the candlelight. The glass revealed him in full. Dark coat, pale face, the scar, the tired set of his mouth. The eyes of a man who had mistaken being altered for being ended. He stood through the first wave of revulsion, then the second, then the grief. When Clara returned with the evening tray hours later, the west study was brighter than she had ever seen it. One mirror stood uncovered above the mantel. Nathaniel sat at his desk, writing a letter in a steady hand. Mrs. Holloway says you have not taken dinner, Clara said. Mrs. Holloway says many things. She is correct about most of them. A dangerous loyalty. A useful one. He set down the pen. I am reopening the East Terrace tomorrow. Clara's face softened with surprise. For yourself? For the house? For the servants? For anyone who remembers that terraces are made for air, not mourning. He looked toward the mirror. I may not go far. Opening a door does not require crossing the whole world. He looked at her then, and the quiet between them felt less like distance than trust still learning how to breathe. Will you put lavender there? He asked. Clara nodded. If you wish. I do. It was a small request. A few dried stems. A terrace door. A mirror left bare. Yet in Ravenmore Hall, where every surface had been taught to hide him, those small things gathered like dawn behind heavy curtains. Nathaniel returned to his letter after she left. It was addressed to his solicitor in Boston, declining no invitation, refusing no caller, hiding behind no illness. Only one sentence mattered. Ravenmore Hall will receive visitors again when I choose, and it will no longer be arranged to flatter the fears of others. He sanded the ink, folded the page, and looked once more into the mirror. For the first time, he did not ask what had been taken from him. He asked what remained. The East Terrace opened the next morning under a sky washed clean by rain. Servants gathered at a careful distance, pretending to polish railings, trim ivy, or carry baskets of linen so they might witness what none of them dared discuss openly. For 3 years, the terrace doors had remained barred except for cleaning, their brass handles dulled by disuse, their tall panes hidden behind velvet curtains. Now sunlight entered the corridor in a long, bright path, touching dust, stone, and the edge of Clara Bennett's apron as she placed a small pot of lavender beside the threshold. Mrs. Holloway stood nearby with her hands clasped at her waist, watching as if the flowers had been invited to court. Do not crowd the doorway, she murmured to the nearest footman, though she did not leave either. Duke Nathaniel Blackthorne arrived without announcement. He wore a dark morning coat, no hat, no raised collar beyond what fashion required, and though his steps slowed when the light touched his face, he did not turn back. Clara lowered her eyes briefly, then looked at the lavender because sometimes courage needs privacy more than applause. Nathaniel stopped beside the open doors. Beyond them, the terrace stretched toward the gardens, where wet stone shone silver and the hedges carried new green at their tips. The air smelled of rain, earth, and the sea beyond the cliffs. He had forgotten that Ravenmore possessed so much air. It seems smaller, he said. Clara stood several feet away, hands folded. The terrace? The fear. Mrs. Holloway looked down quickly, But Clara heard the tremor beneath his words. Perhaps fear grows large in closed rooms, she said. Nathaniel glanced at her. You make everything sound simple. No, Your Grace. I make simple things sound possible. He stood with that answer for a moment, then crossed the threshold. One step. Nothing more. The servants did not gasp. Mrs. Holloway's keys did not move. Clara did not smile too brightly. The restraint of the house became its kindness. Nathaniel reached the stone balustrade and placed one hand upon it. Sunlight lay across his scar without mercy, yet also without judgment. It was only light. That realization nearly undid him. He had treated daylight as though it belonged to the beautiful and the unmarked, as if the sun itself might recoil from him. But the morning remained indifferent in the gentlest way. It warmed his sleeve. It caught the lavender. It moved over the gardens he had paid men to maintain, but had not walked among in years. Then a carriage sounded on the front drive. Mrs. Holloway stiffened. A footman hurried in from the hall, face anxious. Your Grace, a gentleman from Boston has arrived. Mr. Alden, from your solicitor's office. He says he carries replies concerning your letter. Nathaniel did not retreat from the terrace. That was the first victory. Show him to the morning room. Yes, Your Grace. The footman left. Clara gathered the empty flower basket, ready to return below stairs, but Nathaniel spoke before she could go. Miss Bennet. She paused. Yes, Your Grace. When Mr. Alden is received, see that the porcelain service is used. Of course. And leave the mirror uncovered. The words passed through the corridor with the quiet force of a bell. Mrs. Holloway looked at him sharply, then bowed her head. Clara felt her heart tighten, not with triumph, but with reverence for the cost of such a small command. Yes, Your Grace, she said. By noon, Mr. Alden sat in the morning room beneath the uncovered mirror Lady Vivian had exposed, though now it reflected a different scene. A solicitor with papers, a housekeeper standing proud as a general, Clara pouring tea in plain porcelain cups, and the Duke seated upright beside the window with full daylight on his face. Mr. Alden was too well trained to stare. More importantly, he was kind enough not to perform the labor of not staring. He simply conducted business. There were invitations answered, accounts reviewed, repairs approved for the ballroom roof, and a list of households to whom Ravenmore would extend formal calls when His Grace decided the time was proper. Nathaniel listened, signed, and asked questions with a steadiness that made Mrs. Holloway's eyes shine suspiciously. Clara placed the tea near his hand and turned the spoon dull side up out of habit. Nathaniel noticed. After Mr. Alden departed, he remained in the room while the house settled around the change. You may leave the spoon as it falls next time, he said. Clara looked at the tray. As you wish. I did not say I would like it. No, she lifted her eyes. Only that you would survive it. For the first time, Nathaniel smiled fully enough that the expression reached both sides of his face, not transforming the scar, not erasing it, but carrying it with him into the light. Clara saw the smile and looked down at once, not because she was afraid of it, but because it felt too private to keep for herself. Outside, the terrace door stood open. Inside, the mirror held the room without ruling it. And somewhere deep within Ravenmore Hall, the long season of hiding began to lose its claim. That evening, Ravenmore Hall did not return to darkness. Lamps were lit, but curtains remained open where rain had once made mirrors of the windows, and the servants moved through the corridors with a cautious wonder, as if the house had changed its mind about grief, and no one wished to startle it back. Duke Nathaniel Blackthorne spent the hour before supper in the west study, seated beneath the uncovered mirror with letters spread before him. Invitations, replies, estate reports, and one note in a narrow, elegant hand from Lady Vivian Cross. He opened at last. The words were polished, wounded, and false. She regretted any misunderstanding. She hoped Ravenmore would not judge her too harshly. She trusted old friendship would outlive an unfortunate moment. Nathaniel read the note twice, then placed it in the fire without anger. Some doors did not need to be slammed. They only needed to remain unopened. Clara Bennet entered with the evening tray just as the paper curled into ash. Another invitation, Your Grace? An apology that mistook itself for one. She set the tray down. Tonight, the spoon lay as it fell, bright side up. The small oval of silver caught his hand, the cuff of his coat, a broken shimmer of his cheek. Nathaniel saw it. He breathed through it. He did not turn it over. Clara saw that too, and because she saw it, she said nothing. Silence, between them, had become a language more careful than speech. Mr. Alden believes the autumn gathering can be held here if the ballroom repairs begin this month, Nathaniel said. Clara looked toward the closed doors beyond the study, as if she could see the abandoned ballroom through walls. That would be a great deal of light to invite back. Yes. Do you wish it? He leaned back, studying the question rather than the ceiling, the fire, or the mirror. I wish to decide for myself before the world decides for me. Clara folded her hands. That sounds like a beginning. It feels like a negotiation with a man I buried too soon. The honesty settled softly in the room. Clara did not rush to comfort him. That was one of the reasons he found comfort near her. Then perhaps speak to him kindly, she said. He survived more than you allowed him credit for. Nathaniel looked at the mirror, and this time the man inside it did not seem like an enemy. Not a friend, not yet, but someone waiting with a tired patience. You make mercy sound practical. It often is. Cruelty wastes energy. A faint smile touched him. You dislike waste. I am a servant, Your Grace. Waste has always looked different from below stairs. The words reminded him of the distance between them, not because she sharpened it, but because the world had carved it long before either of them entered the room. He was a duke with a house beginning to wake. She was a servant girl who had taught that waking without asking to be praised for the dawn. The thought made gratitude feel insufficient, and something warmer feel dangerous. Miss Bennet, he said, have you family who depend upon you? Her eyes lowered. No living family. I send part of my wages to the woman who kept me after my mother died. She runs a boarding house near the harbor. And the rest? I keep it. For what? She hesitated, then answered because they had both earned a little truth. A room of my own someday, with a window that opens. A table. Books if I can afford them. Lavender if I cannot. Nathaniel heard the modesty of the dream and felt, with sudden shame, the vastness of his own locked rooms. Ravenmore had hundreds of windows. He had spent years refusing them. Clara wished for one. That is all, he asked softly. No, she said, but it is what I know how to name. Before he could answer, Mrs. Holloway appeared at the door, unusually flustered. Your Grace, the West Gallery staff have uncovered 3 mirrors by mistake during cleaning. Shall I have them covered again? Nathaniel looked toward Clara, then away, because the decision had to be his. The old fear stirred, not dead, only less enthroned. No, he said, leave them uncovered. Mrs. Holloway's face shifted, the smallest crack in a lifetime of discipline. Very good, Your Grace. When she left, Clara gathered the empty cup, but Nathaniel stood. Walk with me to the gallery. She stilled. Your Grace, that may not be proper. Then follow at a servant's distance, if the house requires its theater. The bitterness in his voice was not aimed at her, and she knew it. They moved through Ravenmore's corridors, past lamps and old portraits, to the West Gallery where moonlight lay across polished floors. 3 mirrors stood uncovered between tall windows. Nathaniel stopped before the first. Clara remained several steps behind. In the glass, he saw himself alone. Then, farther back, he saw her reflection too, small, steady, present but not claiming the moment. He faced the second mirror, then the third. Each one returned the same truth from a different angle. He was scarred. He was alive. He was not alone unless he chose to be. At the end of the gallery, he turned back to her. When the ballroom opens, I would like the servants' library restored first. Clara's eyes widened. The servants had a library? My grandmother established it. My father closed it after a dispute over expenses. I never reopened it. Why tell me? Because you mentioned books. The moonlight touched her face, and for once, her composure trembled. Not from fear, from being remembered. That is a generous act, Your Grace. No, Nathaniel said, looking toward the mirrors that no longer ruled him. It is a useful one. Clara understood the gift hidden beneath the borrowed language of practicality, and the gallery, bright with glass and moonlight, seemed to hold its breath around them. Ravenmore had begun with 1 uncovered mirror. Now there were 4, and in each of them, the Duke appeared less like a man returning to his old life than a man learning how to build one that did not depend on hiding. By the time spring settled fully over Ravenmore Hall, the mirrors had become ordinary again. Not harmless every day, not easy every hour, but ordinary enough to hold sunlight, passing servants, open doors, and the reflection of a duke who no longer arranged his life around avoiding himself. The west study stood bright in the mornings now, its curtains drawn wide, its black cloths folded and stored in a cedar chest that Mrs. Holloway ordered moved to the attic without ceremony. The ballroom roof was repaired, the east terrace filled with lavender pots. The servants' library reopened in a room that had once held and used hunting trophies, and on the first afternoon, Clara Bennet stood in the doorway with both hands pressed around a book she had not yet dared to borrow. Nathaniel saw her there from the corridor and paused before speaking, because some dreams deserve a moment before they are touched. "That shelf receives the best light afternoon," he said. Clara turned, startled, then lowered her eyes out of habit. "I was only looking, Your Grace. Books are poor decorations when no one reads them. Then the room will be very useful." That was the intention. She looked back toward the shelves, and the quiet happiness on her face moved him more deeply than any praise from society ever had. Weeks earlier, he might have mistaken the feeling for gratitude. Now he knew gratitude was only the door. Beyond it waited respect, tenderness, and the dangerous wish to be worthy of being seen by someone who asked so little from the world. Society did return, as society always does when a closed door begins to open without its permission. A small gathering was held in the restored ballroom, not grand enough to be called a ball, not modest enough to be ignored. Candles shone in the chandeliers. The mirrors along the walls remained uncovered. Guests entered with cautious curiosity, expecting shadows, tragedy, perhaps the thrill of discomfort. Instead, they found music, fresh flowers, polished floors, and Duke Nathaniel Blackthorne standing beneath full light in formal black, his scar visible, his posture steady, his eyes no longer apologizing for what they saw. Some stared. Most tried not to. A few smiled with genuine warmth. Lady Vivian Cross did not attend. Her absence improved the room. Clara served near the long table with the other household staff, dressed in a clean dark gown and white apron, her hair neatly pinned, her hands calm as she poured tea and arranged cups. Nathaniel did not seek her out with his eyes too often, because respect mattered more than longing. Yet when the quartet began a slow waltz and the mirrors multiplied the room in gold, he found her reflection briefly in the far glass. She was not watching the scar. She was watching him stand among people without disappearing. Their eyes met in the mirror, and neither looked away too quickly. Later, after the guests had gone and the servants carried away the last cups, Nathaniel found Clara on the east terrace, placing spent lavender stems into a basket. The night air was cool, and beyond the balustrade the gardens lay silver beneath the moon. "You should be resting," he said. "So should you. I am a duke. We are notoriously poor at sensible habits. I am a servant. We are paid to notice them." The small exchange settled between them with the ease of something practiced not through flirtation, but through trust. Nathaniel stood beside the lavender pots, leaving space enough for propriety and close enough for honesty. "The gathering went well," Clara said, "because Mrs. Holloway rules this house more effectively than any monarch, and because you did not hide." He looked toward the dark glass of the terrace doors. His reflection stood there, faint but present, with Clara's beside it. "No," he said, "I did not." She held the basket against her apron. "Are you glad?" The question was simple. The answer was not. "I am not glad for what happened to me," he said slowly. "I am not grateful for pain because it taught me something. Pain is not made noble by being survived." Clara's face softened, and he knew she understood before he finished. "But I am grateful that I survived long enough to learn the mirror was never the cruelest thing in this house. The cruelest thing was believing it told the whole truth." The moonlight touched the side of his face he once hid from every candle. Clara looked at him then, fully and calmly, the way she had from the beginning. "It never did." "No," he said. "You saw that before I could." She lowered her gaze, but he spoke again, gentler. "Clara." It was the first time he had used her given name without title or distance. The sound changed the air between them. She looked up. "I cannot ask for what would make your life harder," he said. "Not while the world remains what it is, and not while you stand in my house under my protection and my wages. But I can offer what is honorable. Education. Authority over the servants' library. A place here that no one may make temporary. And time, if you would allow it, for whatever trust may grow without command." Clara's fingers tightened around the basket handle. She had been offered wages before, rooms before, practical kindness before. She had never been offered time as if it were a form of respect. And if nothing grows beyond trust? She asked. Nathaniel's expression did not falter. Then trust will still have been worth tending. That was the answer that reached her. Not a demand. Not a promise dressed as pressure. A door left open, with sunlight beyond it and no hand forcing her through. She looked toward the terrace doors, where their reflections stood side by side in the night glass. The Duke and the servant girl. The scarred man and the woman who had refused to make his wounds her spectacle. Two figures divided by rank, joined for one quiet moment by truth. Then I will stay, she said, and we will tend what is honest. Nathaniel bowed his head, not as master to servant, but as a man receiving mercy without taking it for granted. In the months that followed, Ravenmore became known not for its covered mirrors, but for its open library, its restored gardens, its music in the ballroom on clear evenings, and the Duke who no longer lowered his face when visitors arrived. Some whispered that a servant girl had changed him. They were wrong in the simple way gossip is often wrong. Clara had not changed his face, his past, or the cruelty that had once driven him into shadow. She had simply stood beside him until he could see that he was more than what had been wounded. Some hearts do not heal because the scars vanish. They heal because someone gentle looks at them and still sees the man beneath.